I'm very happy here to announce the new fellows and the new year of LINA research, let's call it like that, directly or indirectly related to the case of Krvavica. But for the lectures, as we agreed upon, there will be immediate questions after each single presentation, but then afterwards we're going to have a panel discussion. And for that reason, among us here, we have my very dear friend and my companion and partner work and life, Anna Ryynänen. Anna Ryynänen is a principal researcher and theorist from Technical University of Graz at the Institute of Contemporary Art. We have been collaborating for years, and her perspective, as you might have already witnessed, is very critical, but also inclined to be very provoking in the sense of a terrible child always trying to gain attention from the beautiful headmistress and be noticed and seen. So now this is going to be the perfect setting for Anna as well. I think all of us will be enjoying this. So Anna is here actually to do a little bit of an introduction to each fellow. So Anna, please come shortly to the stage.
Thank you very much, Anna, for inviting me and for this beautiful introduction. So, once upon a time, when I was young, I was also fellow at that time called Future Architecture Platform, that was later kind of reinvented as LINA. And I'm very happy to see here another architects and artists who at that time were also young, and I'm glad to see that I'm not the only one who kind of changed this role from once provocative young kind of or provocator, radical provocator into a moderate moderator, an old moderate moderator that I'm going to try to be today. So I will introduce participants of today's event, and then, as Anna has already said, you can ask really questions after each presentation that relates directly to that presentation, and after that we will have a kind of discussion round, which I will start as, because I was asked actually to be a respondent, not a moderator, so I've prepared myself a little bit better. And then we will start that discussion in a way that I will ask a few questions to each of the presenters separately, and then after that I think that already at that stage some intersecting points will become apparent, which will then, so that after that we can start a kind of more open discussion, also open to others. Thank you. So the first presenter is Liisa Ryynänen. Yes. Architect and artist from Helsinki, explores and develops alternative display and research methods in architecture, fieldwork, especially in modern buildings threatened by demolition. Graduated from the School of Arts, Design and Architecture at Aalto University in 2020, and have also studied practical philosophy at the University of Helsinki. The title of the lecture or the presentation will be How to Dismantle the Master's House Using the Master's Tools. Welcome, Liisa, and I'm very curious about the presentation.
Thank you. Hi. So, as said, my name is Liisa Ryynänen. I'm an architect. by education, and in my artistic practice I work mostly with site and situation-specific installations. I'm often using existing building elements and components that I have collected from building demolition sites. Yeah, and in this lecture I will discuss some aspects or some aspects of theoretical background or things that I've been thinking during a working process of a project that I did for the Museum of Finnish Architecture and Design Museum, their joint exhibition called Fix, Care and Repair. An outcome of that was an installation and a photography series, and I will show you some pictures of this project during this talk. And this project addressed quite many themes related to, for instance, to new aesthetics of repair architecture and authorship and so on. But in this lecture I will concentrate on contemplating our relationship to existing research tools, and in this case especially to the building evaluation criteria. And I consider this topic relevant to this event as it's part of this discussions of care and repair in architecture, and it addresses the title of this event, The Future Cities, or the future in what we already have, not so much from this point of view of materials or material reuse that are at the moment really widely discussed in the field of architecture, but more from this point of view of how do we use these research tools and this that we already have, and how do we live in these circumstances that we are at the moment. Yeah, so I will first talk shortly about the background of the building evaluation criteria that is used in Finland, and secondly I will discuss two different ways to critically approach them, and I see them both stemming from a kind of like different feminist traditions. And finally I will argue in favor of one of these and explain how I, in a way, use it as in my project. Yeah, so I used to work several years in an architecture office as a researcher, and my work was concentrating especially on the building history service. Building history service are in Finland, I'm not sure how is it in other countries. I could assume that it's somehow similar, but these surveys are used, for example, to evaluate the building's protection status, and they are mandatory if the owner wants to, for example, demolish the building and build something else there. And this was actually quite often the case in the service that I was doing. While I was doing this work and already in my studies and so on, I noticed that our building conservation practices and tools are deeply rooted to this idea of an architect as a main designer of a space. In building conservation service, for instance, the value of the building is evaluated and defined by three main criteria. The first one is the uniqueness, how unique a building is as an architectural piece. The second one is originality, how well the building has maintained its original appearance. And then there is this third criteria that is called cultural historical layers of the building. And this might sound more merciful, but it's first and foremost understood as this like extensions that are designed by professional architects. And on the contrary, the changes that the building users often at low cost and without the help of any design offices that they have done there to the architecture, they're really hostilely. And from the point of view of architecture researcher, these changes are seen to diminish and damage the value of the building. And this way also, what I noticed in my work, these changes make the building more vulnerable to the demolition orders and the permissions. And at some point I did some kind of a meta research, research of these research methods that I was using. And what I learned is that this criterion, this institutionally and legally most used tool in architecture history research has its roots in conservation of monuments and is linked strongly to the nationalistic aims and the rise of nationalism in Europe at the end of 19th century. So it's clear that, of course, these evaluation criteria and methods has been evolving over time, but it still seems that this original nationalistic and this kind of patriarchal art historical reason is still a framework that continues to guide our preservation decisions. And I argue that it continues to guide our understanding of the nature of architecture in more general. So now, especially when this wave of demolition of modern building heritage intensifies, as we have been discussing also in this event, and we are kind of in a trap that we don't know what we do with our modernistic heritage. Many people have argued that we should get rid of and abandon this criterion and this tool, and there has been many architects who have proposed different kind of new criteria that take into account ecological aspects and so on. But it seems that there's also this kind of in this rejection, there is this deeper social critique on architecture and the history of architecture research. And I can tell you here a short anecdote. As you know, I'm a LINA fellow, and we were having a conference in Sarajevo. And there I was discussing with another fellow who was telling about their work in a university in France, where they teach new kind of research techniques and tools and methods. And at some point of our discussion, I was asking that, do you have building history surveys, or do you have some kind of evaluation criteria that is that the institutions use for evaluating buildings and so on? And first she seemed really confused, and then a bit annoyed, and she responded to me that yes, we have this, we have those kind of things, but these are just a private example of this conservative architecture, white male historical way of viewing architecture. And it was her way to say that it was end of our discussion. We didn't talk about it, and I completely agree with this. But and why am I telling you this? I'm telling you this because it feels that this kind of this attitude is representing this kind of wider critical view where something that is quote unquote not pure ideologically not pure is viewed as something that is like no-go. You can't use it. And in this special case, the argumentation would go that that if we have these kind of research tools that are developed by nationalist and patriarchal art historical reason, we cannot go against these forces with the tools that these forces have developed. And it's a kind of like version of this Austrian lord's famous phrase, the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. And there's a point, and it's a good strategy in many cases, but my question here is that isn't the core of the tool precisely its versatility? Can a tool be a weapon if it's not different? This is a quote that is kind of like a core in this xenofeminist theory and thinking that I have been trying to also use in a really modest way in my practice and in the project that I did. So what I did, like I told you that I was back then working as a researcher and doing this historical service, and then I started doing this artistic project, and I continued doing this this field work that I was already doing in my office work, and I continued like doing this kind of research where I'm trying to identify what is the original architecture, what are the layers that have been that are not part of the original design. And while I was doing that, at some point I also started collecting these layers and these materials, these kind of like components that were not considered as a part of the original architecture. These are some pictures from that field work. Yeah, and then at the end, I used these materials as an artistic material of the installation that I did. And it's a bit difficult to talk about this project because as an author, I'm of course not the best person to evaluate my own work. But I got some feedback where people, or it was quite common feedback that I got, that it was that after seeing this installation, people started to recognize these materials everywhere, and not only recognize them, but also considering them as part of like architecture, because it was also something that had been presented in Museum of Architecture. Yeah, and this was nice to hear because it seems that some way these components succeeded to articulate that architecture is not only a stable work of art, but also this form of co-production that is linked to the time and use. Yeah. So what I wanted to say with this presentation is that, and what was like important for me is that instead of like rejecting the tools that you are already somehow using or getting like overwhelmed with the situation and the unpleasant conditions that you are at a certain moment, in my case the criterion and more generally the work that I was doing and all the contradictions related to it, it might be useful to think how we can utilize these already existing tools for creating something new, but also to weaponize them to uncover these kind of like broader structures of power and cultural thinking that these tools have been creating. And I'm going to end this presentation to the quote by Karl Marx. Who else? Let's go this. I don't remember how the quote was exactly, but it went something like, "People make their own history, but not in the conditions of their own choosing, or not in the circumstances of their own choosing. Rather, they do so within conditions already existing, shaped and handed down from the past." Yeah. Thank you.
Well, I mean, I was thinking that maybe there is a certain anonymity concerning many of the standard parts that are used for these electric rails and the standard office lighting and the standard part of this and that. But I guess there is also some sort of design included there. Like there are probably industrial design products of, and some might even be like some like incredible success stories because they sort of penetrated the entire building industry with this like typical standard art. Did you ever look into those kind of in a way the histories that are there? Because I think while we often consider them to be kind of completely without a design, but then kind of they in their purest format, or somehow they actually are. And then when you, in your installation, sort of like focus our attention to them, then you also look at them kind of in a sort of exhibited way. And in some cases you realize, well, you know, as a sort of technical solution that fluorescent tube thing is sort of nicely designed.
Did I go more deeply into the history of these elements that I used? A bit, but my aim wasn't like, my aim was more like use these, especially these like aesthetics themes and this like spatial expression than like explain like this product was invented this time and it has affected this way and so on. It could have been done, but I just didn't do it in this project. But it's in the research that I've been doing, it's just that there is this some kind of like the limit between original design and then this kind of like other design is so strong that when you do this survey you're concentrating mostly to the original design and then everything that is done afterwards is just like changes that are like mostly diminishing the building's value, cultural historical value. So that is also like telling that even though I've been doing a lot of this kind of like research in my office work, I'm not that familiar of the history of these specific elements because there are changes in the design.
Maybe you have a short question related to this idea as anything cherished in architectural history had to be single-authored, and actually what you said, uniqueness, originality, and cultural layers, yet again of another architect or a team of architects. And in your work, especially related to modern architecture, were you and your office were you detecting or researching adaptations that were done by the users. For instance, now we are focusing on details, on specific industrial design that is sort of invisible in our everyday life, and turning that into a tool to defend, you know, let's say a piece of architecture. But we're also dealing with the alterations and adaptations on this sort of level that something is worth. And directly changed via usage, you know. For instance, there is a beautiful modern building, you know, and let's say the tenants started cladding the balconies, or, you know, they started privatizing the first floor, or the sauna turned into a flower shop, or, you know, like such interventions. And
I don't think I've had any this kind of cases, if I understood you correctly, where the architecture is privatized. Not so much.
Or maybe done in a, let's say, in a communal way, but, you know, sort of changed the original design, and then what would it take on that image? So I'm just thinking, like, okay, so we have this building history service, and then we have this sharp, like, jump into the future, you know, like focusing on this sort of micro detail and micro narrative. And there is something in between, you know, that could also, the angle that could be researched in this way of, let's say, non-authored architectural changes, and then what would be your take on that, and how this tool, does it come from the master's house, or it comes from the gardening section? You know, like
the project that I was doing in the office were like following quite this traditional architecture building history service that is the official way to do it. So the thing was that there wasn't anything in between. It's completely something that can be developed, and there are some offices who are doing that, but not in the circumstances of this building survey institution where I was like working with. I don't know if I
Yeah. Because I had in mind already some architects, for instance, the practice of DAI-SAI, you know, how they always develop undesignated space that, you know, left to be readapted or something like that. That was already in practice 20 years ago.
Yeah.
This sort of evaluation in this, okay, but mostly they started with their own, let's say, social housing units, but then they started refurbishing the very much unwanted modern heritage skyscrapers in satellite outskirts of Paris and beyond.
Yeah, and I would say that in Finland we are lacking behind this kind of like architecture practice and design in general, and that was also like a reason why I did this project. Even it's not architecture design, and I don't do like building renovation design or repair at my office work or my work in general. But just like it's weird that in Finland it's called counter of modern architecture. Like also. As you might remember from Mika's presentation, it's like most of our building stock is modern, and there would be really a need for this kind of like approach, but it just like gets this. It sounds, it's in their issues.
Thank you.